Welcome to today's Global Connections program. I'm Bill Miller. What is the United Nations WASH program? What is it doing to promote clean water and sanitary practices? My guest today is going to bring us up to date on this very interesting program. My guest today is Mr. Sanjay Wijesekera. Mr. Sanjay Wijesekera, a Sri Lankan national, is the chief of the United Nations Children's Fund Water, Sanitation and Hygiene Program, commonly called WASH. Mr. Wijesekera, welcome to today's Global Connections program.
Thank you, Bill.
I appreciate you being back with me. We did this 5 years ago.
It's about 5 years, yeah.
Yes, right. Time is flying on us.
Yes, and I'm still here, and you're still here.
That's right. Good to see you.
Yeah.
Let's get right into it in just a moment about WASH. But UNICEF, the UN Children's Fund, is probably, outside of UN peacekeeping, the best known of all UN agencies, I would imagine, as far as the general public. But basically, what is the mission of UNICEF, the UN Children's Fund?
So UNICEF's mission is really that every child achieves their rights, their full rights, and achieves their full potential. So that includes the full range of the basic needs and rights that they need to do that, whether it's access to health, education, water, sanitation and hygiene, and all the things every child should have, every child in the world should have, to make sure that they reach their full potential. And that is really at the core of a better world.
Mm-hmm. And of course, our viewers can go to www.unicef.org, get more information on UNICEF. Now let's talk about WASH, the Water, Sanitation and Hygiene Program. What is your major mission or major goals?
So in line with UNICEF's core mandate and mission, our goal is to make sure that every child and every person has access to at least a basic level of drinking water, sanitation, and can practice hygiene. Because these are fundamental, they're not just fundamental, to good health, but they're also important for a dignified life, particularly for girls and women. So we focus on drinking water, sanitation, and hygiene in all contexts, whether it's in times of peace and stability, or whether it's in times of conflict or disaster, which sadly occurs far too often, as well as in different places, so in the home, but also at school, in health centers and medical facilities, everywhere, all the time. People do need access to these fundamental rights.
Mm-hmm. And of course, our viewers, if they'd like more information on your program, can go to www.unicef.wash.org and get much more information on what we're talking about today. Mm-hmm. We read stories about potable water. Potable water is still a major problem for many reasons. Do we have an idea of roughly how many people are lacking potable water, clean water? And then we can go into some of the other problems that you're dealing with. And maybe if you want to talk about some of your programs as we go along, that would be great. But roughly, do we have an idea of how many people are lacking potable water?
Yes, we do. So the good news, so this is about a glass half full and a glass half empty. So the good news is that since 1990, about 2.8 billion people have gained access to a basic level of drinking water, what we call improved water. Now that's a great achievement, and governments and countries all over the world can share credit for that achievement. However, what it means is that 663 million people lack access to even this quite rudimentary level of service. Now, one of the things when we move in from the MDG, Millennium Development Goals, to the Sustainable Development Goals for the next 15 years is that the Sustainable Development Goals are far more ambitious and have raised the bar. So they've brought in other elements such as the quality of the water we drink, or is it available when it's needed? Is it close by? So when you look at these additional factors, and particularly the water safety or the water quality angle, then there's well over 1 billion people, we estimate, who don't have access to this kind of higher level of service, which you and I may take for granted.
And that's exactly right. This is what we do. We take it for granted. We turn on the tap, or we have a water purification system, a reverse osmosis system, or
right.
whatever it might be in our kitchen or our house, someplace to purify the water a little more. But there's so many people, as you mentioned, billions of people without potable drinking water, and it's a major problem. There's also another major problem that's out there. It's open defecation. This is another thing we take for example. But how severe is this problem?
So again, you can look at two sides of a coin, and the positive thing is the numbers, the absolute numbers on open defecation have started to go down over the last decade or so. So that's and that's despite population growth. So that's progress. And in 2015, there were a bit less than 1 billion people who still practiced open defecation. So that's still a large number. And even though the numbers are going down, we would, to meet the Sustainable Development Goal, which looks at eliminating the practice of open defecation. And I think it's really important here to understand this, because it's a fundamental issue. I mean, in this day and age, when we have, when everyone or so many people have access to incredible technologies like the iPhone and so on, that such a fundamental thing as a toilet, that 1 billion people do not use a toilet, is a big problem. And the rate at which open defecation is coming down is not enough to achieve the Sustainable Development Goals. So we will have to kind of bend the arc of history in order to eliminate it by 2030.
Now, the United Nations General Assembly, which now consists of 193 countries, basically all the countries of the world, have designated November 19th, I believe, as World Toilet Day. What is the significance of that? Why is it important?
So you're absolutely correct. Since we last met, World Toilet Day has become a formal UN day with the General Assembly resolution. And I think that is significant because what it means is this is a global issue. It's of global importance for the reasons that I stated. It also means that it provides the opportunity once a year to raise awareness of this issue, and the fact that it results in children dying. Eliminating open defecation is fundamental to reducing rates of diarrheal disease, which is one of the biggest killers of children in the world still. So it's a fundamental issue. It gives us an opportunity, by having a day to focus on, it gives us an opportunity to bring together people, to raise awareness, but also to bring people together to come up with innovative solutions to addressing the problem. And of course, it isn't just about a day. The action has to go on throughout the year. But I think it helps bring the focus together. And I think the fact that there's a resolution, a United Nations resolution dealing with the issue, means that many or all countries of the world recognize this as a big challenge.
Are there certain regions of the world, certain areas of the world where we're seeing more of these challenges with open defecation, with a lack of potable water, or are these problems worldwide, maybe a little more endemic to certain areas than others?
So that's a really good question, and you can break it up into different pieces. When it comes to, for example, starting with open defecation, Sub-Saharan Africa has a large proportion, or countries with a large proportion of people without access to any form of sanitation, or large proportions of people practicing open defecation. However, there are also great examples of successes. Ethiopia, for example, where UNICEF has a large program, the government or the country there has managed to reduce the levels of open defecation by over 60% since 1990. So that's a huge reduction. That's, again, despite population growth and so on. Nepal is another country which has reduced the proportion of people practicing open defecation by over 50%. That's half the current population as a reduction. And in Nepal, we've worked with the government and others to kind of really generate a social movement around eliminating this practice, and it cuts across villages and political structures and local government structures, as well as communities, from community to community. But it's a real spread of a movement around this issue. Now, I mentioned Africa was a major issue on open defecation, but in terms of numbers, actually South Asia, so the region that Nepal is in, but other countries as well, such as India, Pakistan, is where the largest numbers of people practicing open defecation are located. So it depends, that there are a number of regions of the world battling this problem. And if you take it again to higher levels of service, so say drinking water in the home, or the quality of drinking water, then the net spreads much wider to countries that are actually fairly well off as well, where these problems persist. So everyone has something to do on this agenda.
And it's very positive that there have been gains made, as you mentioned, in the area of reducing the open defecation problem, or reducing that, and also the potable water. Are most of these programs geared towards community education programs, helping people to raise the awareness, explain to them what the problems are, maybe helping to develop new toilet facilities, helping to develop new clean water supplies, or is it a combination of all of the above and maybe more?
Yeah, so it is a combination, and a lot depends on the problem that you're trying to address locally. So, for example, in I mentioned the example of Nepal. So there, the problem being addressed, say a decade ago, was that there were a lot of people practicing open defecation, and you needed to generate some kind of community-level action to address the problem, and thereby create a critical mass of behavior change, if you like, or what we call in technical jargon a social norm around using a toilet. But there are other countries where the problem might be that people do use a toilet, but it's very basic because they don't have access. There's no product or service on the market that they can buy. So it's not that they don't have a toilet, it's that their toilet isn't good enough or what they want. And that can result in them going back to open defecation or not being satisfied. So in those circumstances, what we need to do is to get not give people toilets, because I think that's not a sustainable approach, but to help create a market where there are suppliers who are interested in coming in and providing toilets that are of good quality but affordable to poor people. And in a number of countries, we partner with the private sector to help them to come in and provide these services that for poor people that are affordable to people, but of the right quality. And of course, as you know, sanitation is a very personal issue. So you can't just have one product that works for the whole world. It's very much dependent on communities and practices. So people have to understand the market really well, and that's where we can help companies to come in, understand the market, create the right kind of supplies and innovations, and market it widely to people.
Well, you're watching Global Connections Television, which is a privately funded, independently produced program. The opinions expressed on Global Connections are solely those of the moderator and his guests. We would invite our viewers to go to our website at www.globalconnectionstelevision.com to view previous programs. Also, if you're involved with any type of media outlet, be it a PBS or community access television station, or perhaps it's an educational institution that has an intra-campus television hookup, or you have a website and you're interested in our programs and would like to share them with your family, friends, and the community, please do so. Global Connections Television is provided free of charge, at no cost, as a public service to help us better understand international issues and how these issues impact us no matter where we live in the world. Today we're taking a look at a very interesting program with the United Nations Children's Fund called the WASH program, the Water, Sanitation and Hygiene Program. And my guest today is Mr. Sanjay Wijesekera, who is an expert on this, and UNICEF just has breaking news. We have a recent report that just came out, Strategy for Water, Sanitation and Hygiene 2016 to 2030, and it just so happens that that time frame is the 15-year time frame for the Sustainable Development Goals of the Economic Development Agenda for 2030. Mr. Sanjay Wijesekera, tell us a little bit about this interesting strategy, or set of strategies, I guess, that you have to achieve your goals that we've been talking about up to this point.
Okay, well, thank you for the opportunity to talk about our UNICEF strategy for water, sanitation and hygiene. As you correctly mentioned, this is very much about how we feel we can contribute to achieving the Sustainable Development Goal, particularly Sustainable Development Goal 6 on ensuring sustainable water and sanitation for all. In a nutshell, our strategy really still focuses on the same key outcomes, the outcomes that are most critical for children. Safe drinking water, adequate sanitation, and the ability and the means to practice good hygiene in all contexts. Stability, crisis, homes, schools, health centers, and so on. So all contexts, all places, those core results, outcomes. However, the Sustainable Development Goals present us with, I think, a great, ambitious new agenda, which is more ambitious than the old Millennium Development Goals that ended in 2015. One of the fundamental differences, I think the two fundamental differences is one is the Sustainable Development Goals, by being more ambitious, means that everyone has a role to play and everyone has something to do. So this applies to wealthier countries as well as to the poor countries. The Millennium Development Goals, and particularly on water and sanitation, we're looking at kind of a basic level. So a lot of wealthier countries could say, well, this doesn't really apply to us. I think Sustainable Development Goals, by looking at safely managed water and sanitation, as the indicators are coined, means that it applies to everyone, because it applies to how the services are managed as well. So this strategy looks at our contribution to that ambitious new agenda and how we will adapt the way we work to achieve the same results, but in different ways. And just to give you an example, working with the private sector is an important approach, because the private sector has a huge role to play, not just as a party that delivers services and products, but as a real partner in solving some of the difficult issues, relating to products and services and markets, particularly the market shaping agenda. So there are a number of different approaches that this strategy has put in place for us to work with others to achieve the same critical outcomes for children.
And it was so important you mentioned that the Sustainable Development Goals, as opposed to the old Millennium Development Goals, do apply to everybody. All 7.3 billion people on Earth, all the countries are involved in this. And we were talking about these problems a moment ago, being primarily in sub-Saharan Africa or in Asia, certain Asian countries and that type of thing. But as we look at it today, the 17 Sustainable Development Goals, first one is to eliminate all forms of poverty. The second, to eliminate hunger. These are problems even in developed countries. And as we saw just recently in the United States, in Flint, Michigan, a very progressive state with a high standard of living, they have a water problem where people cannot drink the water. They can't even bathe in the water. It is so bad. So these problems, they may be more aggravated in certain areas, but they can certainly apply to developed countries as well, can they not?
Absolutely, and I think the example you use, and there are many others in other countries as well, I think demonstrates two fundamental things. One is how important the quality of water is for public health, and that it affects everything when we cannot guarantee that. One of the issues we deal with in our strategy as well is to how we approach the issue of ensuring that water is safe. So not just providing people with drinking water, but making sure that it is safe, and how governments can do that. And Flint, Michigan, again, is an example of how important water quality is for children's lives. I think the second issue that it demonstrates is that it's not just about money. I mean, money is important. It enables you to do a lot. But we also need strong institutions who can regulate and support and make sure that whether it's local governments or whether it's companies or water utilities are able to manage the systems properly, and that there are adequate safeguards that protect the poorest and most vulnerable people. And that's an issue everywhere.
It certainly is. Now, there are many factors contributing to these problems, no doubt about it. But one that we haven't talked about yet, and we probably should, many people will say, many scientists will say, our number one problem in this world is climate change. That is adversely affecting virtually every country on the planet. We're all being adversely affected. Sometimes we don't know it. How major is climate change as far as contributing to many of the problems that we've been talking about today? How does that tie in to potable water, tie into open defecation, tie into failing infrastructure, whatever, lack of investment in education or in infrastructure? How important is climate change?
So climate change is a very important issue and a challenge, because it has the potential to undo a lot of the gains we've made in the last 20 years. It is one of the biggest challenges to development. I think one of there are a number of ways in which, well, the link between climate and water is very clear, and a lot of the changes, a lot of the impacts of climate change will be transmitted through water, and you can see that in many instances, either too much water or too little water, and there is a really big overlap between the poorest children in the world and areas that are stricken by either drought or, on the other hand, flooding. So it is a big problem, and again, the strategy gives some key guidance on how we will work with governments and partners to address the agenda. One example is around getting the right or adapting our technologies to the changes that are occurring. And what we're seeing now in many of our programs, including I was recently in Myanmar, where they're making use a lot more of solar energy to power even rural water supplies. So one of the good things is that the costs of solar panels has come down to the point where it becomes a viable option for use in even rural water supplies. And this is happening across Africa as well. And again, these are regions which are endowed with a lot of sunshine. So that is one example of how the kind of the mitigation side of the climate coin, where people have adapted actions to address problems with technology and infrastructure. But it isn't just about technology and infrastructure either. Climate change and adapting to the impacts of climate change is also about, again, about the strength or ability of institutions to manage services. And in that respect, again, we work with communities and local governments so they can change the way they do things to adapt to the changing
exactly. It has to be a partnership to achieve this. It cannot be imposed from the top down.
Absolutely.
It has to come grassroots up and top down. I think I misspoke at the beginning. I better clarify. I think I gave the wrong website. It's www.unicef.org/WASH. I think I misspoke at the beginning of the program. But Sanjay Wijesekera, this is such an important topic. All of these issues that you're dealing with are so vital, and many of the things we take for granted, we shouldn't. We should learn more about these, and we should really be appreciative for what we have, and also help people in other parts of the world who maybe do not have access to these facilities for whatever reason, and to provide assistance to them. But I want to thank you so very much for a very interesting and a very informative program.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. I'm Bill Miller. Thank you for joining us today on Global Connections Television.